Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As Deb just mentioned, my name is Stephanie Parrish. I'm coming from Toronto and Region Conservation Authority today. And today I'm going to be talking to you all about saving seeds, from gathering all the way to sharing. So we've gone over housekeeping, going to bypass this. Before we start, I really just want to set the right intention for thoughtful communication. So I would like to start today with an acknowledgement of Indigenous territory. So we respectfully acknowledge that the lands we are situated on are traditional territories and treaty lands, in particular those of the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaty First Nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Through our work with land and water resources within the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority appreciates and respects the history and diversity of the land, and we are appreciative of having the opportunity to work and meet in this territory. So some of you may be familiar with Toronto Region Conservation Authority, others may not. We were developed after Hurricane Hazel, and we are one of 36 conservation authorities across Ontario. Within that, we take care of 9 watersheds and the Lake Ontario shoreline in the Greater Toronto area. And our work is really truly to reduce flood risk within the area, but also to preserve and protect the land. And as a part of that, education is a key component of people building sustainable citizenship towards our green spaces, towards nature. And so as a part of what I do, I help encourage people to get outside, enjoy and appreciate nature. So I'm interested to know, I'm sure there are several of you out there tonight that may be watching with a friend, a family member. So if you're able to, we're gonna put up a quick poll, and I just wanna understand how many people are tuning in from your device tonight. So just you, no problem, just put a 1. Maybe you've got a few others with you. This will just help us get a better understanding of how many people are actually tuning in. All right. Fantastic. Okay, I think we are getting pretty close to almost everybody finishing. Great, this is great information to have. No need to share the results. I will continue on. Thank you everyone for answering. So before we get into seed collection, I want to talk a little bit about the life cycle of plants. You know, it's such an important piece when we're talking about seed collection, understanding the sort of cycles that the plants we are collecting from, what they go through. It's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, but we'll start off, you know, from seed dispersal. So when plants are ready, and we'll get into that in a minute, plants will actually disperse their seeds in a variety of methods. Some are equipped to be able to go with the wind. They can be blown away. Milkweed is a perfect example of this. They have tufts of hair or fiber rather that allow the seed to be transported much more easily through the wind. In other instances, seeds are able to kind of cling on to animals or humans or other things to be moved. And other times they're just kind of easily falling. So they'll disperse in a wide variety of ways. And once they're dispersed, they have the opportunity to germinate. So once they're germinated, they'll be able to start to sprout. So they'll start building a very small root system, and they'll start to build leafy structures. But at this point, they're really, really quite small. And once they've sprouted, they'll continue to grow. After they've kind of developed their first set of leaves, we call them seedlings. So again, these are very young, very immature plants at this point, but this is just kind of their early stages of life, and when they're probably most fragile. As they grow, eventually they'll get large enough where they become an adult, and once they have gained enough energy and it's the right time of year, they'll start putting their energy into producing reproductive parts. And oftentimes this is towards building flowers so that those flowers can be pollinated. So they'll put all of that energy into their flowers. Eventually those flowers will bloom in whatever way that plant chooses. And when the flowers bloom, it's actually allowing the plant to open up and show its reproductive organs to pollinators. So it allows the transfer of pollen from one flower to the next in order to be able to fertilize that flower. Now, you'll notice that I've been choosing milkweed as an example here all the way through. And milkweed is actually a really interesting example. A lot of us know that milkweed has a really special relationship with the monarch butterfly. And I know many avid native plant gardeners are really trying to encourage butterfly milkweed, swamp milkweed, and common milkweed to come back into their garden. And I've chosen this as an example because it's actually a quite interesting plant that goes through its life cycle. So if you look at this picture, you'll notice the milkweed plant actually produces quite a lot of flowers. But when we imagine walking past our milkweed plants or the milkweed plants in the field, we often only see a few pods. So each and every one of these flowers actually has the ability to be able to turn into a pod once fertilized. But pollination for a milkweed plant is actually extremely unlikely and very difficult. And that's often why we might see hundreds of flowers on a milkweed plant, but very, very few pods. So in order to pollinate a milkweed plant, an insect will need to kind of enter the flower to receive nectar. And as it's doing so, it needs to kind of slip its legs between the anthers of the flower into a small sac where it can get its pollinia, really, really tiny pollen. And this pollinia will stick to the leg of that insect. Now, already for it to slip its leg into that exact spot is fairly unlikely, but then it has to fly to another flower and then accidentally stick its leg into a similar spot on another flower of the same plant. So that chance is actually quite low. But when a milkweed plant is fertilized, it has a ton of ovules. And so the ovules are what we're hoping to fertilize. And so when the insect is able to pollinate, transfer the pollen from one flower to the next, it's actually able to fertilize almost 200 ovules that all turn into seeds. And so when we envision a milkweed plant, when we envision its pod and we open it up, we'll notice there's hundreds of seeds in there. So even though it's really, really unlikely for a milkweed plant to be pollinated and fertilized, when it is, it has the reproductive power of almost up to 200 seeds that it can disperse. So it's really, really powerful in that way. And so eventually, if fertilized, the milkweed plant will be able to develop a pod inside the seeds. And eventually, as the pod dries up, it will start to split open. And from there, the tufts are able to kind of disperse and flow with the wind across the land to spread the milkweed seeds. So, that being said, I'm also interested to know, has anyone collected seeds before? Yeah, maybe you collect seeds all the time from your plants, and then you use them for the following year. Maybe, yes, you've tried collecting seeds. Maybe you've actually gone and picked up some milkweed seeds, but you had so much trouble germinating them and they've never gotten anywhere. Maybe you haven't tried yet and you're a new beginner. So I'm interested to know what everyone's level of experience is. I see we have a few new beginners. That's great. Also a lot of experienced people. That's also great. All right. Fantastic. I believe we probably have the majority of our answers in. So thank you everyone for answering that poll. So we have about 47% of people, so 17 out of our group of 39 tonight, or 36 who have voted. About 17 people said yes, they have a lot of experience, they've been collecting seeds from their plants, and they use them the following year. So that's great. I hope I can add some new information to you guys tonight. Some people have said that they've tried but haven't had much luck germinating seeds. Again, totally okay. We're going to go into those processes later tonight, and hopefully I'll be able to help you along so that next time you have an easier time. And for those of you that are brand new beginners, we have about 7 people who said they were beginners. No problem. We're going to go from the very start to the very end. We'll cover everything that you might need. Great, thank you. Perfect. So let's get started. So tonight, you know, there obviously are a variety of different plants that you could collect seeds from. They may be some of our non-native ornamental plants that we have within our gardens. Perhaps people are growing vegetables and fruits that they want to be able to collect seeds from. We're not going to cover that tonight. Tonight, we are going to talk about native plants. And I'm here to sell you on the importance of native plants, not only for our larger communities and ecosystems, but also the benefits for you as a gardener. So native plants, if you're not sure what they are naturally occurring plants that have been here for thousands and thousands of years. And they are natural to the area pre-human intervention. What I mean by that is we don't have any settlers coming over from the east, bringing plants over and settling them here in Canada. So these are plants that have been here for thousands and thousands of years. And when we look at those plant communities, the communities, if we were to imagine 100, 200, 300 years ago, what the Greater Toronto area would look like, we would see a lot more of our woodland and prairie types of ecosystems. Our woodlands would be obviously lots of trees, dense canopy coverage, they're pretty shady, and then we have our prairie ecosystem, which have lots of flowers and grasses. And so as we've continued to develop, we removed a lot of these types of ecosystems. So when we're planting these sorts of plants, we're really just trying to support these communities again in our own backyard. So our woodland communities are those that might replicate a shade garden. So planting native species that would normally be found in woodland areas, those are fantastic for your shady parts of your garden. The prairie communities, on the other hand, are trying to replicate those full sun conditions. So really, there's a diverse and a beautiful amount of plants that are native to this area that you can be supporting in whatever conditions you have in your backyard. So a few key points about native plants. Well, Ontario's native plants have co-evolved with a variety of organisms. Particularly our insects, and have built really close networking relationships with all of these other organisms. So it's really important in order to protect the larger health of the ecosystem, so all of the birds, the insects, the wildlife, the microbes, the fungi, all of those things are interconnected. So we need to support the communities that would naturally have thrived here. As well, because they've built those relationships, they're often a source of food and shelter for a lot of wildlife, and they're also really good at tolerating the insect activity that we have here. They're used to all of the insects because they've co-evolved with those insects and adapted to those insects. So they're pretty resilient plants. When we talk about their food webs, just to break it down a little bit more, our native plants are, as I mentioned, often food and shelter sources for a lot of our insects and other wildlife. When it comes to insects, they have what they call host plant relationships. So the monarch butterfly, for example, the caterpillar can only eat milkweed. So in that way, milkweed becomes the host plant for the monarch caterpillar. If we're to lose all of our milkweed, we're going to lose all of our monarch caterpillars and therefore our monarch butterflies. So it's really important that we maintain that host plant relationship with those insects. And then beyond that, our birds, our local birds and other wildlife depend on those insects for food. So it's really important that we have a very diverse range of insects all over the place so that we can support our beautiful birds that come to visit us. On the other side of that, native plants also produce some amazing seeds and fruit. And again, that's fantastic food sources for a lot of our plant-eating birds and a lot of our other wildlife. Some other benefits of native plants, if I haven't sold you already, they're super water efficient. So they are drought tolerant. They are very used to the fact that Ontario summers don't have a ton of rain, and when they do, it's a downpour. They're used to the fact that it could be weeks before it rains. And so they have these very fibrous, deep roots that go into the soil. And because of that, they're actually able to reach deep pockets of moisture and nutrients that are lower down. Now, the image that I have displayed here, if I can draw your attention to the very far left, so we've got these beautiful meadow flowers, and on the very far left, you can probably just see a very small line with basically no root system. That's our turf grass. That's what we use on our lawns in our backyard. And you can see it has pretty much no root system. And that's why we have to water it continuously and fertilize it continuously, because it has no structural root system that can really support it. It's really a poor quality plant for us to be growing. So that's why we have to put so much energy and water into that grass to maintain it. Versus our native wildflowers, you can see in comparison, their roots are significantly deeper. And so they're really, once well established, really fine just being on their own in your garden. You don't have to worry about watering them too much or tending to them too much. As well, because their roots are really fibrous, you know, they minimize the weedy plants that might come through. So they spread out, they're really fibrous, and the weedy plants often have tap roots and have a bit of a harder time growing in between those roots. So in fact, once you get a well-established garden, as long as there's no invasive species coming in, really you don't have to weed them much either. And also when it comes to fertilizer, our prairie conditions here in the Greater Toronto Area are really nutrient poor soils. So these plants are used to being in basically sand, and they are totally fine. So, you know, you don't really even need to fertilize that much. A little bit of compost is great. In fact, we tell you don't fertilize because they'll grow like crazy. So you don't have to water them as often, you don't have to weed as often, and you don't need to fertilize. So if I haven't sold you all native plants, beyond this, I hope that I can maybe chat with you more about the benefits. So I'm interested to know, in your garden right now, do you have any native plants in your garden? Yes, maybe you do. No, not yet. Or maybe you're just not sure. You've moved into a place, you have no idea what you have in your garden, or you just haven't had the time to really analyze and look at it. You knew you threw something in there a while back, but you're not sure what it is. You just know it's pretty. All right. So yes, I'm so glad to see there's quite a few of you that already have native plants, and I'm so happy to see this. Okay, so about 28 of the 36 who voted tonight said, yes, they do. Thank you. Yay, I'm so glad to hear. 2 of you said you don't yet. Hopefully I've sold you on doing that. And the 6 of you who are unsure, totally okay. You have lots of opportunity to figure out what it is that you're growing in your backyard. So one of the benefits of being able to share seeds, especially when it comes to native plants, is really trying to help recover some of the populations that are missing from the area. So red mulberry is a species at risk. This is a plant that used to grow in Carolinian forest, so an area that stretches in the Greater Toronto Area down to Point Healy. It's a very nutrient-rich soil, dense forest coverage, and red mulberries used to thrive in this. But of course, with rich soils, as development started to happen across Ontario with settlers, we started transforming a lot of those forested landscapes into farms. And so we lost a lot of that habitat. And because of that, our red mulberries have been dramatically on the decline. Now, that being said, as you know, homeowners or renters or people that are working on a property, you actually have a great ability to help reestablish these populations. A lot of organizations are working hard to do that in the wild, but if you can get your hands on some seeds from a local merchandising source, then you have the ability to help kind of reset those populations in your backyard and share them, so others can also start planting and growing these in your yard. Pawpaw is another great example. This is actually a tropical fruit grown in temperate regions. A lot of people don't know about pawpaw, but pawpaw, it has been here for a really long time. Again, those same conditions, those Carolinian forest conditions with rich soils and dense canopy cover. Because we lost those forests, we lost a lot of our pawpaw. And so this fruit is actually, the flower itself is pollinated by beetles instead of bees, which is really interesting. But also the fruit is like a custard mixed with mango and pineapple. And it is unbelievable that we have something that naturally grows here in Ontario that might taste like that. But beyond the benefits of eating it, it is a species that is vulnerable in the area because we've lost so many of our pawpaws. In fact, I'm sure probably a lot of you have not even heard of it before. So, you know, being able to start growing these in our yards allows us to be able to help reestablish these populations. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of things. So when do you want to harvest your seeds? So seeds should fall off easily off the plant when they're ready to harvest. Meaning if they're like, you're having to like really tug at it, chances are they're not quite ready. Different individuals are going to be ready at different times. It's not safe to say go out in August and you'll find all the seeds you need, because that will greatly depend on when those flowers are blooming. It'll also depend on how long after they've withered are they ready to have their seeds distributed, and that changes dramatically depending on each and every plant. So I'm going to start tonight off by saying you need to do your research in terms of understanding what plants that you want in your yard and what it's going to take for you to be able to collect those seeds, save those seeds, and replant them again. Because everyone is absolutely different, just like humans. You can use different types of tests that will allow you to determine how viable those seeds are. So oak acorns, for example, those guys you can actually use a float test for example. You can use a cup of water, put the acorn into the water. If it sinks, that seed is viable. If it floats, that means then some insects, weevils, for example, have gotten in and laid some larvae inside, eggs and larvae inside. And that seed's no longer going to be viable for you to use. So being able to test it after you've collected it can give you some indication as to whether or not this thing is going to grow. And just as like a tip, the ripe seeds are usually tan or dark brown. So if you see a lot of green seeds, or you're noticing most things are kind of green or yellowish, they're probably not quite ready, and you should wait a little bit longer to ensure that you're going to get something that's going to thrive. Okay, so what to harvest when? So, for those of you who might not be super familiar with native plants, I just wanted to give some examples of things that you could be able to grow in your yard. So something that you might be harvesting in mid to late June, for example, are spring ephemerals. So wild columbine is a perfect example of that. Canadian anemone and Jacob's ladder, all very beautiful. They bloom in the early spring, but they are ready to be harvested. Their seeds ready to be harvested by mid to late June. In terms of getting into later summer, some of these species will also be able to be found in the fall, but you can keep an eye on when these flowers are starting to wilt and produce seeds. But wild bergamot, cardinal flower, and common yarrow, all really fantastic flowers for a variety of different pollinators. They're really great. They attract lots of bees, butterflies, and even hummingbirds. All of these are ready to go around August and onwards. Again, obviously, if something has bloomed in August, it probably won't be ready until September. So just keep an eye on your plants. Harvesting in late September and October, and if you're really lucky, early November. These are the plants that we'd be collecting now. So gray-headed coneflower is a great example, swamp milkweed, like we talked about earlier, and dense blazing star. Now, I'm going to start off dense blazing star just to talk about the fact that this is a species of plant that is really, really rare. It's an at-risk species. And organizations are working really, really hard to reestablish its populations, make sure there's genetic diversity in the plants. This is one that I will say, no matter what space you're in outside of your yard, do not take seeds from this plant. Let it be. It's really important that we're establishing these populations again, and we shouldn't be taking seeds from this plant at any point beyond our property. If this is something you're lucky enough to be growing in your yard, by all means take the seeds. If your neighbor has and you guys can share seeds, fantastic. But as for kind of wild dense blazing star, absolutely don't take the seeds. So some best practices that are related to that. You want to make sure that seeds are dry. So you want to make sure that there isn't a rain event and then you're collecting them, because then they're wet from the rain, and then there's a higher chance that they may rot. So they are naturally able to dry in the position that they're in on the plant. So my recommendation to you is just wait a day or two after it rains, let them naturally dry out again, and then be able to collect them. Make sure you know the identity of the plant before you collect the seeds. This is so important. You don't want to be collecting seeds of plants that might be invasive, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But also you want to make sure that you're not giving someone seeds of a plant that you maybe thought you knew, but you weren't totally sure, and they think they're growing something that they're not growing at all. So it's really important that you know what you're collecting from, and that you're making note of that. You also want to ensure you're not collecting seeds from species designated at risk. So that's what we're talking about, the mulberry, the pawpaw, the dense blazing star. Those are all at-risk species, and you want to absolutely avoid those in the wild. Leave them be, let them reestablish their populations on their own. By all means, if your neighbor has them next door and they're willing to share those seeds with you, go right ahead. But in terms of going out into the wild, please leave those be. A few other don'ts. Don't collect the seed from public green spaces and parklands. So roadside ditches, totally okay. You know, friends, properties, maybe you know a local farmer and they're okay with you coming onto their land to collect some seeds. Those are totally okay. But public green spaces like parks and parklands like conservation areas, you really don't want to be collecting from those spaces, because municipalities, conservation authorities, and other organizations are really working hard to rewild those spaces. So by taking from them, it's not a good idea. Beyond that as well, it's also illegal in a lot of municipalities. So check your bylaws and make sure that you're not doing something illegal by collecting those. Foraging can give you a ticket. So you know, make sure that you are following your bylaws and you're protecting the green spaces that are there. You never want to collect more than 15% of seeds on a single plant. You just want to make sure you're only taking what you need, first of all. But also, you know, you want to make sure that you're not taking everything from that plant, because then it has no way to reproduce that year. And that's not beneficial to our communities either. It's also not beneficial to the plants that you have in your garden. They may be able to naturally reestablish from the seeds that they drop, and then you're growing and sharing some others. You want to make sure that there is still lots left over. Not every single one of those seeds is going to grow into a plant. So you want to make sure that you leave enough behind that that plant is going to be able to reestablish itself. You also want to make sure that you're not taking from plants that have already had seeds taken. So if you walk up to a flower and it happened to be on a roadside ditch, for example, and you notice on the flower head that there's lots of seeds missing, don't take from that. You know, move on to the next one where you can see a full seed head. And that's just making sure that someone hasn't come along and already collected that 15%, then someone else comes along and collects 15%, and then someone else comes along and collects 15%. We just want to make sure we're leaving enough seeds. You don't want to collect from the first and last plants. Essentially what this means is you're always looking a plant ahead. You don't want to collect from the first plant because you don't know if that's the only plant in the area, and that might just be trying to reestablish itself in that space, and by taking its seeds, you're hurting its ability to do so. But you also want to make sure that, you know, there's lots of different communities along the way, that, you know, this is a well-supported plant community that you're not going to hurt by taking some of those seeds. So don't take from the first plant. If you see a small cluster or one plant, and you notice up ahead there's another cluster, and beyond that there's another cluster after that, then take from the second cluster. And that's just making sure, again, that you're not taking from those new populations that are trying to reestablish and then hurting those communities. You also don't want to collect without express permission. So don't just walk onto somebody's property and start taking seeds. You know, that's not a good thing to do. So always make sure that you have permission when you are collecting off of private lands or like municipal green spaces and parklands. Okay, so I mentioned avoiding invasive species. So making sure that you know exactly what kind of plant you're taking. There are a lot of really bad invasive species here in Ontario. Buckthorn, dog strangling vine, Phragmites. These plants are all over the place, and you might think, hey, I'll just take a few of these. There's lots of them around, but we actually really don't want to be spreading these species. So invasive plants are non-native plants that are aggressively taking over ecosystems here in Ontario and are outcompeting our native species. So they're a really, really big problem. And the worst thing that we could do is intentionally take seeds from them, give them to our friends, and spread them elsewhere. They're already extremely difficult to manage. We don't then need people kind of spreading them that way. So please, please, please make sure that you are checking what species it is you're collecting from and never taking from invasive species. So in terms of collecting methods, there are quite a few. So you have cutting. So cutting just simply means that you're gathering all the stems, remember, only taking 15%, and I will reiterate that through all of these different collecting methods. But you're collecting the seed heads together, and then you can use a sickle, ideally pruning shears. Realistically, that's probably what you have as opposed to a sickle. You're going to collect them with one hand and just give it a quick snip. And then, you know, any of those stems of seeds that you're taking, you just snip this and then put them into an envelope. So this is probably the easiest one. It's really the best method for grasses, but it can also be used for herbaceous plants as well. Stripping is another method. So less so for grasses, more so for herbaceous plants. This just requires pulling the seed head to dislodge the seeds. Gently, you know, you don't have to rip it, just like gently kind of plucking away from the seed head and putting that into an envelope. Some plants are a little bit sharper, pokey, or can leave little tiny thorns in your skin, which can irritate you. So we recommend wearing gloves while you're doing this. And again, remembering that you're not taking the full flower seed head, you're only taking 50. Beating and shaking. So these are often used for shrubs or trees. So beating is essentially just tapping the branch, putting, depending on how large of a shrub you're working with, a tarp or some paper below, and just giving it a nice tap, 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 tap that allows the seeds to naturally fall, only taking about 15% of those, putting the rest back into the soil and continuing on your way. Shaking is when you start getting into those really fruit-bearing trees, you know, like acorns, for example. If you're trying to get down apple seeds, like there's I mean, apple seeds is not a great, but you know, other fruit-bearing trees. But essentially, you're literally just giving the branch a shake until the seed is able to fall, and then you can collect that. So while you're collecting, there's a few key pieces of information that you want to take note of. So in particular, you know, I like to suggest using an envelope because it's perfect for writing on, it's perfect for keeping your seed safe and secure. So what I like to do is I have that little envelope. You want to take note of what species it is you're collecting. So remembering, you know exactly what it is you're picking before you pick it. You're going to write down the species. You're going to talk about the location where it's collected. You know, look around. What are the soil conditions like? What is the sunlight condition like? Especially when you start getting into trees, this is really important because the trees that you're growing from seed are going to thrive much better in conditions that are similar to their mother tree than they are to just whatever it is you're going to put them in. So if you take note of those conditions, they'll do a lot better in similar conditions that their mother tree came from because they have evolved and adapted in that kind of condition. You also want to note the date collected. So different seeds have different lengths of time that they'll remain viable. And so you just want to make sure that you're not going to waste those seeds. So writing the date you collected them allows you to be able to kind of track when it was they were collected and how long they'll be viable for. I personally like to add to this. If I know what species I'm collecting, I should know how long they can be stored. I will also add like a deadline due date to the envelope so that they can be stored that way. Also note any interesting or unusual features of the parent plant. Perhaps it is, they have some strange deformities. For example, if you're collecting from trees and you look up and you notice, wow, so many of these trees have fungal issues or, you know, many problems within the trees. Perhaps genetically, this is not the tree that you want to be collecting and spreading. So really take note of all of the different features of the plant that you're collecting from. So once you've collected everything, it's time to clean your seed. So one technique is called winnowing. Sorry, I jumped too fast. So this essentially means you are separating the seeds from the shaft. And there are a few ways that you can do this. So I personally like to just kind of get a little sieve and you just kind of shake it around, shake, shake, shake. Screens as well are helpful. It just kind of dislodges the seed from the shaft. Even better if you have a sieve that keeps the shaft up top and then drops the seed below, and you can actually just sieve everything out. So yeah, all you're really doing is just kind of removing that gentle encasing around the seed. You can also try a blow test. So all this means is that the chaff is often much lighter than the seed itself. So if you just go and try and blow away the chaff, the seeds will kind of stay behind and the chaff will drift away. So that's another way of kind of separating them. When you get into more complicated seeds, so berries or hard seeds, or seeds with like tons of fluff, you might have to use some creative processes to get those seeds. Dry vacs, for example, are one method that you can get the milkweed fluff off of milkweed, just like holding onto the seed and suck up the milkweed fluff. For those like fleshy berries, you know, ideally you pick them once the skin and fruit around the berry is kind of shriveling back. Obviously, there's still going to be some encasement still wrapped around the seed. So one thing you could do in a blender on like super low is just gently kind of blend them, not so that it's crushing the seed, but more so just that the flesh starts to loosen up around the seeds and you can peel it back. So one really key thing about cleaning is really making sure that anything that's going to cause rot is not there anymore. And so that's why you're trying to remove those fleshy bits and the chaff from the seed, because those could potentially cause rot to your seed, and then your seeds aren't viable anymore. So you really want to get them so that they're nice and dry. So while drying, one quick tip is to turn the seeds a few times a day for 1 to 2 weeks. And this just means that they're constantly getting surface area that's drying. You're not just having one side that's drying and one side that's kind of wet sitting on a surface, and then that wet side eventually begins to rot. So if you're turning them over, just give them a quick shake and a turnover. You know, that's all you need to do just to ensure that each side is getting an opportunity to dry. Some fleshy seeds may require some special treatment so that they don't rot. And special treatment, I don't mean like chemical treatment or anything like that. Simply that certain seeds, if they touch each other, they can cause rot. So chestnut is a perfect example of this. If 2 chestnut seeds sit side by side, they'll start to cause rot between them. So they definitely need to be separated while they're being dried and stored. Again, clean seeds, they store the best and the longest. They're a higher chance of them being viable if they're stored well and cleaned well. And basically in terms of storage, you just want to store them anywhere that's a dry and stable temperature until you're ready to do stratification. So what do I mean by stratification? Well, essentially, I just mean breaking seed dormancy. So in temperate regions, you know, there's a bunch of mechanisms that the seeds use to protect themselves to not just start sprouting in the middle of winter. So if, you know, they didn't have these mechanisms, we sometimes have like weird February days where it's super warm out, and then it gets really cold again. And so if seeds just sprouted the second it got warm, they'd be in big trouble because they would die off the second it got cold again. So really seeds have built these mechanisms so that it requires a long period of cold followed by a period of warmth for a certain length before they will germinate. And we call this stratification. And there's 2 different methods to this. There's wet stratification and then there's dry stratification. So wet stratification is wet cold stratification, as we call it, is one of the most common treatments for hard to germinate plants. It's one of the best ways in order to get them to germinate. So for this, it's not too hard. Essentially, you're going to take a paper towel. You could use peat moss as well if you like. I personally love the paper towel method. You basically spritz the paper towel. You don't want it sopping wet, just moist. Then you're going to sprinkle the seeds on top of the paper towel. Fold the paper towel over on itself so that the seeds are sort of sandwiched in between and they're not flying everywhere. You're going to put that paper towel into a Ziploc bag, close the Ziploc bag, throw it into your fridge. And it will depend on what species of plant that you're trying to stratify, depending on how long you need to leave it in the fridge. This could be a few weeks, this could be a few months. It all depends on the plant that you're working with. So that's one fairly easy method. For the peat moss method, essentially you're just taking a bag full of peat moss, putting the seeds aside, and then storing it. And then we have dry stratification. So very similar process, except that it doesn't require that moisture. I should also add with wet stratification, you do want to go in every so often and just check to make sure that that paper towel hasn't gone dry. And if it has, just again, give it a little bit of a spritz, not soaking it, just a spritz. Then in terms of the dry stratification, it's a similar process, except there's no moisture. So this time, all you're really doing is putting the seeds into a Ziploc bag, putting them in the fridge, no moisture, no water, just leave them in the fridge. And that's dry stratification. It's getting that coldness from your fridge temperatures. And then again, in terms of length of time, that's all going to depend and vary on the species that you're working with. Then you're ready to germinate. So in terms of stratification, this can, you can avoid needing to stratify it by using the natural processes that occur. So let's say you've collected seeds, you're not sharing some, or you are, up to you. You can either try and grow them inside first, or just like let nature do its thing. So by doing germination outside, essentially all you're doing is sowing the seeds in the fall. This is also known as frost seeding. You can also do them when we get our sort of first snows in the, or not, sorry, some of our last snows in the very, very early spring. You know, you're putting them down, that allows them to get that kind of cold period. Personally, I just like sowing them in the fall for this method. And then basically you're just letting nature have that cold period and then have that thaw in the spring, and you don't need to worry about doing stratification in your fridge, and they will grow. Now, the only problem with this method is that some of those seeds might be lost to animals, and to be honest, not as many seeds grow with this method, even though you would think it would, simply because it's the natural process. Again, plants produce many, many, many seeds because not every seed is going to make it. So this is one method you could use, but not your highest chance. Then you could germinate outside in trays. So again, you're letting nature do its thing, but this time you have a little bit more control. So what you're using for this is you're going to take 4-inch pots. You're going to fill them with potting soil. It doesn't really matter what kind of potting soil you use. Any kind of potting soil is fine. You're going to scatter the seeds across your pot, and then you're going to cover it with chicken wire. And the reason why chicken wire is so important is because the chicken wire is going to prevent those animals from getting in and taking your seeds away. So put some chicken wire over it to protect it. With this, you also want to make sure you're leaving it in a space that has consistent temperatures. So what I mean by that is you don't want to leave it outside in the sunlight, because then the sun's going to heat it up during the day, and then it's going to get really cold at night, and it's going to constantly be fluctuating in temperature. The best place you can actually leave this tray is either in a shady spot on your property where it's not going to have those huge fluctuations. So behind a shed, maybe if you've got a deck, like under the deck, lots of places you can put it. The snow being piled on top is actually totally fine for these seeds. You don't need to worry about that. The snow will actually insulate them a little bit and create that consistent temperature. Another space you can put them is inside a shed, or if you have a detached outdoor garage that doesn't have any like temperature control, that's another great place to put them. So as long as your garage is going to get cool, that's totally fine. I know for me, for example, my garage is attached to my house and remains pretty warm, so I don't want to put them down there. So the other piece to this is that you want to make sure that as it gets warmer in the springtime, you're going to move those plants to what their preferred growing conditions are. So if it's getting warmer and I have sun, like full sun tolerant plants, I want to move them out into the sun. If I have shady plants, I'm going to leave them in the shade. So just make sure that once they start sprouting, you're starting to move them into the environment that they need. Okay, and then we have germinate inside. So you can leave it outside, let nature do its thing, or you can grow them inside. Totally up to you. This is where you're absolutely going to need to store and stratify those seeds, because you have to replicate the processes inside your house. So you can either sow the seeds, you can sow the seeds indoors from mid to late winter. You really want to start early for this because you need the time to be able to stratify the seeds in your fridge looking over at my fridge as I say that, stratify the seeds in your fridge, and then give it time to be able to germinate and spread. And that can take many, many, many weeks. So you really want to get this process started in sowing them around midwinter to give them the time that they need to then get them out in spring. Don't let the soil dry out. This is one of the worst sins when it comes to growing plants indoors, is just like thinking that they're a-okay, because it's much drier and hotter in the house. They have a higher chance of drying out more quickly. And so it's really important that you are keeping them moist. Again, not soaking wet. You just want to keep them gently moist. The spritz bottle is perfectly fine. After the major frosts have ended, as gardeners, we know that's usually May 2, 4, around then, you know, you want to begin to harden your plants. And essentially what this means is you're starting to get them used to the conditions of the outside. So you were to take your plants from inside, just dump them outside, they might get really stressed out. You know, those are a big shift in conditions from a warm, cozy home to outside. So what you want to do is you want to get them ready for those conditions. And this only takes about a week. All you have to do is take your tray of plants, put them outside when it's sunny, leave them outside during the day, bring them back inside during the night, so that they get used to the like warmer, cold conditions, but at night they're not like dropping in temperature dramatically. And that's going to just harden them and get them ready to stay outside fully. So after that week, you can leave them outside. And then they're ready to plant. Or you can keep them for a little while longer, sell them, trade them, whatever you want to do with them. Just make sure that you're keeping in mind that you're now caring for a living thing and not to forget about them and let them die. It's a lot of information. I am wondering if we have any questions so far. I've seen the chat just blowing up a little bit from my end, so not sure if we have any questions or if people have just been commenting, but do we have anything?
Yeah, well, Stephanie, we have 3 questions.
Okay.
I'll give you the first here. Other than St. Williams, are there any places to buy a diversity, like a variety of locally sourced native plant species in Southern Ontario?
I can send perhaps a follow-up with some examples of places that you can get native plants or native plant seeds. One of my absolute favorite recommendations is Native Plants Claremont, sorry. This group works really hard to ensure that the species, or sorry, the plants are genetically native, not just native species, but like from here in Ontario. They do a really great job of that. So they're one example. Credit Valley Conservation also has a fantastic list of retailers of native plants and native plant seeds. So perhaps I can send that in a follow-up and share that resource with everyone.
That's great, thank you. Another question, some folks say store seeds in glass jars or refrigerators. Is that advised, or is dry at room temperature okay?
That will depend on the plant. And I'm going to give some examples later, very specifically from step 1 to step 6 of collecting and propagating those seeds. It really does depend on the plant. Some do quite well just being stored in a paper bag in a dry, dark place with consistent temperatures. That's totally okay. Others really do need to be stored in the fridge. I can tell you acorns, for example, do need to be stored in the fridge, and glass jars are the perfect way to do that. So that does really depend on the species that you're working with. And unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer unless you know. So my apologies for not having a direct answer for that one. Were there any more?
Oh, you're muted, Laura. We can't hear you.
My apologies.
Okay.
The next question, 4 parts, for outside in trays method. Yep. How do you ensure moisture levels are maintained?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, I said under a deck, and that's actually probably not the best example. I'm imagining my deck, which is on the 2nd floor, so it's you know, an easier chance for snow to be able to accumulate on top. But as I mentioned, having snow on top of your trays is totally okay, and that's going to actually help regulate that moisture. It's not going to really get them too wet, because as the snow melts slowly, it'll help water the plants. Honestly, yeah, like under a shed, or if you have a tall deck under there is the perfect example, or a shady spot. Entirely up to you, but the natural processes outside will keep it moist.
That's
You don't need
great.
to worry about watering or anything.
Well, thank you so much. Another part to that same question, if pawpaw is a tropical plant, it's not native, so why introduce it?
Sorry, no, it is not a tropical plant. It's a tropical fruit. I know that made that very confusing. But it's a temperate plant. It's actually from here. It's from the Toronto region. It's not introducing, it's a native plant to the Carolinian forest area. So from like Toronto to Point Pelee, that whole area, it's totally native. So it is a temperate tropical fruit plant. I realize that's probably a little confusing. It's all I'm suggesting is that the fruit that it produces it is likened to tropical fruit like mango and pineapple, but it grows here in temperate regions. So it's not being introduced, totally native, and it will thrive here. It does really well.
That's great. So staying with that same plant, the pawpaw,
Yep.
Does it require dry or wet stratification?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know. I personally have not grown pawpaw. I'm happy to follow up with that question. If that person wants to send me an email, I can follow up. I have someone on my team that I know for sure would have that answer for you. I unfortunately don't have it tonight, but I'd be happy to help.
Okay, wonderful. And I think we've addressed this next question earlier. Where can you buy or source native seeds? And you had indicated that you might share resources with us.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Happy to share those resources later tonight or tomorrow as well. Yeah, we have a long list of native plant sources.
That's terrific, wonderful. And Stella has a question here. Is there any expiry day for seeds if not planted the next year after collection?
Again, it will depend on the species. I know some plants need to be planted pretty quickly and die off pretty quickly. Others can last a long time. Lance leaf Coreopsis, for example, can be stored for 3 years before it is propagated. So realistically, yeah, I mean, it really depends. Unfortunately, you're going to have to do your research on that in terms of what the storage time is, depending on the species.
Oh, that's great. The next question, can you recommend a good source for seed envelopes? I know, Stephanie, you spoke about using a paper or something paper, not plastic, but would there be a good source for seed envelopes?
Honestly, it doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, exactly. Not plastic, just because that maintains moisture a little bit more. In terms of sourcing, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I just use whatever envelopes that I can find or recycle. So I'm not like sourcing them from any particular company or any particular style. I'm literally paper bags are also totally fine. So entirely up to you.
Wonderful.
Laura, if it's okay, maybe any remaining questions we can hold to the end, and I
absolutely
want to be cognizant of time. Okay, yes. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so I want to give you guys a few, I'm going to let you have the opportunity, if you have any more questions, type them in now as we go over this portion. But essentially, I want to give you some examples of seed propagation, and I'm going to walk you through a few examples of grasses, shrubs, trees, and flowers from step 1 all the way to sowing them. So in terms of butterfly milkweed, if you're going to sow the seeds indoors, ideally you want to have the seeds out. If you're going to leave them out to germinate outside, you want to have them out in the fall. They really need that cold period. But if you're sowing them indoors, you want to just get a small pot, or a glass jar works as well with soil. And you're just going to put the seeds on top of the soil and then sprinkle a little bit more soil on top. They don't really need much treatment, but they really do benefit from cold stratification. I should add that's cold, wet stratification. You want to put those pots that you have filled with soil. So because you're keeping that soil moist, that's why it's making it cold, wet stratification. You put them in a plastic bag and then refrigerate them for 3 weeks. And that's indicating to the seeds that it's getting really, really cold, and then you'll take them out again, and then it thinks it's really warm again. So it's creating that stratification process for them. I know some people as well, if they've stored them, I have heard that some people put them in the freezer even, put them in the freezer for a week, and then like alternate freezer, fridge for another week, and then leave them in the fridge for a week, and then they're ready to go. I honestly have not tried that method, but I have heard of that. So as soon as you've left them in the fridge for a few weeks, in that wet, cold stratification stage, you remove the plastic, put them out into some light, so by a window, and you just want to make sure that you're not overwatering them as they grow. I mean, this is really true for pretty much any plant that you're trying to grow from seed. You don't want to soak the thing. You know, you just want to give it enough water that it can thrive and it doesn't get dried out, but don't make it super, super moist, because that can cause rot or mold issues. And then basically you can start transplanting the pots outdoors when light frost is still possible. They're pretty tolerant, and then you can start getting them into the ground. Purple cone flower, another really beautiful plant, one of my personal favorites. This one's actually taken in my garden. So with these guys, you can sow the seeds indoors, or you can actually sow them outside before the last frost. So, you know, again, the seeds are pretty tolerant, as long as you're not waiting deep until spring to sow them outdoors, they're fine. If you're sowing them indoors, they want dry stratification. So again, no moisture, no paper towel, just into a bag or jar into your fridge while storing. And then when you are ready to actually sow them, you can soak them in warm water for 24 hours to get them ready, and then plant. New England aster, a beautiful flower if you're not familiar with this one. This one, if you can envision when we go out into the fall right now, it's a little bit late, but maybe like 2 weeks ago, that beautiful, almost like Easter purple color flower that you see in the field. That's our New England aster, beautiful plant. It blooms in the fall time, obviously. And so it's a nice plant to have in your garden if you're looking for diversity in bloom times. These guys here, again, you're going to sow the seeds just indoors beneath the surface of soil. So a nice little pot, sprinkling of seeds, sprinkling of soil on top. You want to enclose in plastic again. So keep in a plastic bag or put some plastic wrap on top and refrigerate for just 2 weeks. Then you're going to remove that plastic wrap and put it into a well-lit area. And that's that stratification process. It'll start germinating once it gets warm. Dense blazing star. So again, this is the species I talked about earlier that is at risk, making sure that you're not collecting these from wild spaces. These guys here do best with a 30-day cold treatment, wet stratification. So for a whole month, it needs to be in your fridge with that wet stratification. So you can use that damp paper towel and a Ziploc bag for this. You can also just directly sow them in the seed bed in the fall if you want to use the natural germination process that happen outside. Or you can wait until early to mid-spring to do this as well. Okay, little Bluestem. So I mentioned I have a few that I'm going to showcase from steps of collecting to sowing. So these guys here, they are ready to be collected through those stripping methods we talked about earlier. And you can collect them in September to October. They like dry cold stratification. So again, leaving them in your fridge for about 60 to 90 days, but not using that moist paper towel. You want to sow the seeds indoors in warm soil, or they can be directly seeded right into the beds in early spring entirely. And these guys here are beautiful. I don't have, unfortunately, a picture of them in their prime, but they're like a gorgeous like blue grass, and then they grow a gorgeous yellow stem that transitions more into like an orangey color in the fall. It's really quite lovely, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a beautiful grass to grow. This is a perfect one. Lance leaf Coreopsis. So I mentioned this one earlier. So these guys, their bloom time is summer, but it does go into late summer as well. And so seed collection can happen anywhere between late summer and fall, depending on the flower. And here you're just sort of waiting for the flower to wither and then keeping track of time when the seed is ready. So after it withers, it takes about 4 weeks for the seeds to be ready to be collected. With these guys, they do have that shaft, so you do need to make sure that you're removing that shaft before storage. And as I mentioned earlier, as long as they're sealed in a refrigerated container, they can be stored up to 3 years. So that's a really long time. It doesn't necessarily have to be the year after if you're not ready for that. To germinate these guys, they do need that wet paper towel. But here, because we've already stored them in the fridge, we're creating that stratification process. In the dry stratification, then they're ready actually to go into a moist environment. I love growing these. They're super easy to sprout. I just take the stratified seeds, I put them in a wet paper towel, but as opposed to putting them in my fridge, I'll hang them in my window. And then I can actually start to watch the seeds sprout, and then I'll plant them from there. So that's one method that you could use to get those guys to sprout. They're super easy to do. And a beautiful flower. And these guys are ready to plant in spring. If you're looking for shrubs, red osier dogwood, beautiful, beautiful shrub. They've got red stems, so it adds a little bit of color diversity to your garden. They produce berries so that they support our local wildlife through food. It is a gorgeous white blossom. Sometimes they also change a really beautiful color in the fall. So all around a really amazing plant to have around. These guys here, you're going to collect the seeds in late summer and autumn. So you'll notice in the picture above, I have a few examples here within one flower. So on the lower half, you can see the berry itself is starting to shrivel away and the seeds being exposed. Maybe a little bit more time after this, it would be ready to be collected, but that white berry up top, it's too soon, leave that be. If you notice in the picture, the bottom berries, you can start to see that light brown tan color. So that indicates to me that that seed is pretty much almost ready to go. I'm just waiting for a bit of that fleshy bit to be removed. And if it stays, again, using like pinching that off or using that low blender method, that's a method you can use as well. You can either sow seeds directly. I mean, I've added this everywhere. Obviously, you can sow seeds directly whenever you want, but if you are sowing them inside, you want to do cold stratification indoors. You want to, again, remove those hulls, remove that fleshy bit, and make sure that these seeds are especially clean. You don't want to leave the fleshy bits on because that'll cause the seeds to rot. And you can stratify them through that wet cold stratification. So you can either put them in the paper towel, or ideally with these guys, using peat moss is the perfect way to do this. So essentially, you just got a bag of moist peat moss, and then you stick the seeds inside to stratify them. And that's just like replicating as if the seeds were falling onto the ground during the winter time. You want to cover the jar lightly, place it in the fridge, and you want to leave your seeds to stratify in the fridge for about 60 to 90 days. So that's a really, really long time, and keep that in mind because then you want to start growing in midwinter, right? So you need to start stratifying these fairly early. And then, yeah, you could sow them in spring as well, or plant them in spring when they're ready. For tree, I use bur oak as an example here. So you want to harvest the acorns either from lower branches. Again, you can see that kind of difference in color in these acorns here. One still has that kind of fleshy bit. Even its cap still has a lot of the flesh, the green coloring to it. The seed is not ready to go. So the one beside it, on the other hand, looks a little bit more ready. So looking for that tan color again. So any branches that are low to the ground, or if you take them from the ground, that's fine too, but you just want to make sure that those seeds are viable once they hit the ground. So we talked about insects getting into acorns, that'll make them non-viable. So that's where you're going to use that float test, right? You're going to put it into water. If it sinks, then they're not, sorry, if it sinks, they are viable. If they float, they're no longer viable. That means something has drilled something into it, air can get in, and it's floating now. So they're no longer viable if they float. You can either plant these guys right away, or you can store into the fridge up to 4 months. So again, for that person that asked me about the length of time that you can store them, it really depends on what you're working with. Here, maximum time is really 4 months before they're no longer viable. You want to store these in a Ziploc bag with moistened peat moss. So again, just taking a handful of peat moss, putting your acorn inside and sticking them into the fridge. Okay, so those are just some examples. I do want to talk to you a little bit about sharing. I know Caledon Library today is going to talk to you about their seed library. But you know, we've talked a lot about what it is to grow these plants in your own home and using your own seeds to grow them for yourself. But you know, you can share them with lots of other people as well. You know, share them with your neighbors, your family, your larger community, or use some incredible resources that already exist out there that build networks for people to share their seeds. So seed libraries are a perfect example of this. It's an opportunity for you to take out seeds like you might a book, and then you know you're able to grow the plant, and then whatever seeds you collect from your plant, you just bring back to the library to share. And I know Caledon Library will get into that a little bit later. In terms of the libraries that are available, there's some in Toronto, Caledon, Markham, Mississauga, and Richmond Hill, depending on where you're another great opportunity are events like CD Saturdays. These are events that happen in the springtime that are a great opportunity for you to meet other plant enthusiasts. You've got lots of people that are selling seeds, lots of people sharing seeds, lots of people sharing the plants that they've started or selling the plants that they've started. So if you're looking for another opportunity for those native seeds and plants, CD Saturdays are another great example of that. And in terms of where CD Saturdays exist in the Greater Toronto Area, Toronto, Scarborough, Brampton, Mississauga, and all throughout the York region, these events are hosted. So keep your eye open. And as I mentioned, share with your neighborhood. We're trying to rewild the community. So as much as that you can share with your neighbors, your friends, and your family, it's better. Okay, so I've got one more poll for everybody. I'm interested to know, do you feel inspired to collect and share native plant seeds from your yard? Yeah, maybe you're like, you're ready to do this, let's go. Maybe not so much, you're not quite ready yet, you need a little bit more information, or you'll have to do more research. This might be a little bit too complicated, we'll see. I'm glad to see a few of you have voted already and feel that yes, you're ready and inspired to take on native plants. I'm glad to see this is such an important topic nowadays for us to be rewilding our community spaces. We have so much opportunity in the land that we've developed to rewild it, to bring back native plant communities and really help establish a larger ecosystem where we live. So it's really great to see that more people want to take this on. Okay, I think we can close the poll. It looks like not many other people have voted yet. So yeah, you know, a lot of you said yes, that's great to see. A few of you said you needed to do a little bit more research, that's totally okay. You know, growing plants from seeds can be a little bit more difficult. So definitely, you know, do your research into the plants that you want and maybe kind of work yourself up from some of the easier plants to work with to the harder ones too. Okay, that leaves me to the very end. Before we get into the final questions, we are going to send out a quick survey as well. If you're willing to fill that out, that'd be really helpful to me. Otherwise, we have some great resources and other amazing events with Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And they're not always gardening related. They could be wildlife related. They could be rain barrel related, entirely up to you. Lots of different topics that we share with the public. So I encourage you to take a look at our website and see what might be best for you. We are also starting to run very, very, very small and socially distanced public events in certain regions, just like walks with, you know, a few people with us. So if you're interested in just getting out and learning a little bit more about nature, you're welcome to join us there as well. Aside from that, I believe our survey and website have been shared in the chat. And beyond that, I think I'm ready for a few more questions. And then I know Caledon Library would love to speak as well.
Wonderful. We do have a few more. Actually, we have quite a few more.
Okay.
Some of the questions I believe you might have covered, Stephanie. Here's one. How do we know the stratification method for a plant?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's research. There's lots and lots of people who have been growing these plants for a really long time. So there's lots of resources on Google. I will admit there are some plants in here that I have not worked with personally, and it was just simple research, I guess, into looking into what those plants need. There's a lot of great books and guides that can assist you on growing native plants as well. Again, the internet is a fantastic resource. There are also a lot of native plant retailers that can share their experience as well with growing those.
Okay, you might have covered this just with that last answer. Which native plants are the easiest to germinate? Could you pinpoint one?
That's a good question. For one that I actually talked about tonight, lance leaf Coreopsis is so easy, so easy. That one I recommend, and it's a really gorgeous flower. Black-eyed Susan's another easy one. That one you can use dry stratification with, but also fairly easy to germinate. Yeah, I would say Black-eyed Susan's, gray-headed coneflower is pretty easy, and lance leaf Coreopsis. They're all yellow. I'm sorry I've given you all yellow examples if that's not your color, but definitely beautiful flowers and pretty easy to start with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We did receive a question here. Does the process of extracting and germinating, etc., apply to vegetables and fruit?
I will admit, fruits and vegetables are not my specialty. In terms of extracting, yeah, I mean, they're going to be fairly similar processes. You don't want to leave seeds within a fruit or vegetable for too long, or fruit rather. You don't want to leave seeds in a fruit too long before they start to rot with the fleshy membrane that's around it. So yes, you want to extract those seeds somewhat early. Ideally, you're sort of leaving those plants to kind of dry out and wither on the plant itself, as opposed to plucking it and then taking the seeds. I know there are certain fruits that you can do that with, though, so it varies. Unfortunately, just not too much my experience.
Okay, well, that's great. We had a couple of people ask this question: how do you destroy or get rid of invasive plants?
It's a question that always comes up. It depends on what invasive species we're talking about. Goutweed, for example, is tiresome, but really important. You're essentially having to dig up the fibrous networks. So they have runners that will go all throughout the soil, and even the smallest sliver of a runner or a root left behind can start a whole new plant. So a lot of patience is needed for goutweed. But essentially, yeah, you're just having to literally very gently, so that they don't break apart and leave behind all of the runners and roots from goutweed. Buckthorn can be removed, but the entire root system has to be removed with it, because it can just regrow from its roots. It's a pain in the butt. Dog strangling vine, you always making sure that you do this well before it goes to seed, because like milkweed, it's got those kind of fluffy tufts that will just blow away in the wind and spread. So you really want to make sure well before it starts to seed, you're just ripping it out of the ground. And they have fairly shallow root systems. So as long as you're getting under and getting a good grip and ripping it out, and just continuous years of ripping it out until it no longer thrives in the area. That's dog strangling vine. Phragmites, if you have Phragmites, that one's a pain in the butt. You have to, the best method so far that they've discovered in getting rid of Phragmites is using a spade and just chopping each stem off under the soil with one clean sweep. If you disturb the soil too much, it just regrows. So one clean sweep under the ground, chop the shoot off. Don't let any of the seed heads spread by any means, and going back year after year after year until it's gone, and just making sure each one of those seed heads is like 10,000 seeds to be spread. So making sure that that's not spreading as you're trying to do that. Those are just some examples. I'm sure there's many, many more. The Ontario Invasive Species Council has some great resources online to teach you about invasive species and how to get rid of them as well.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Nice.
Here's the question: how do I know how long the seeds are viable, and how to know how long to store the seeds in the fridge? Is there a book or website that you could share?
Yeah. I directly don't have a resource offhand. I would actually really love this question. If this person is willing to email me individually, I would love to be able to get an adequate answer for this. Again, I have a colleague who would have that direct book or website resource. So I'd be happy to get that from them and share with you. I unfortunately don't know offhand. Again, in just doing research about the plants, most kind of native plant books that teach you how to grow native plants will always give this information. But there are a few guides and resources online, both government and even just native plant stores. You know, they'll give the instructions for storage and propagation, even within the seeds that they're selling. So doing research like that is really, really helpful. But I know that there are resources and I would love to share them with you. So if you can send me a follow-up email, I would love to be able to provide that.
That's great. We do have a question here that I might be able to comment on. Are the listed seed libraries for all types of seeds, not just native plants? Now
I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, we do not restrict our seed donations to we would, let me just say, we accept native plant seeds. So yes, our seed library may contain some native plant seeds. And I'll get into the information about the Caledon Seed Library just after all the questions are answered, and it might provide some more information. The second question here, what are the pandemic arrangements for seed sharing now? And I'm going to take that as seed sharing with Caledon Public Library, and the information I share will tell you the locations that are collecting seeds, and all of our branches, well, actually 3 branches will collect seed donations, and one of our branches has the seed collection in it right now, so you can pick the seeds up there. But I'll get into all that in just a few minutes. We do have a few more questions.
Okay.
Oh, I think that's the last one. I do want to take a moment to say that in the chat box, if you could just take a moment and fill out the survey, it will take about 30 to 40 seconds, and the link is right there. It's a SurveyMonkey link. At this time, I would like to thank Stephanie so much for that very informative presentation. There were just so many tidbits of great information on seed saving. Wonderful. I love the float test on whether the nut goes up and down. But now it's my pleasure to share information about the Caledon Seed Library. So this collection was launched in 2018. Caledon Public Library Seed Library is a collective initiative between Caledon Public Library, the Bolton and District Horticultural Society, and the Albion Hills Community Farm. And the premise is for it to be a community-led program. Now, residents can browse the seed collection, borrow up to 10 seed packets a year, grow, enjoy, and then harvest the seeds for donation to sustain the collection for others to enjoy the next year. And this is all free with a Caledon Public Library card. We currently have 1 seed cabinet available, and it's at the Albion Bolton branch. Plans for a seed collection and cabinet are underway at our newest branch in Southfields Village that just opened up about a week ago. We're currently accepting seed donations, and here are the 3 branches that are accepting donations: the Alton branch, Albion Bolton, and Caledon East. Now, there is a second initiative to support this seed collection, and it is a seed garden. It's located at the Albion Bolton branch, and its sole purpose is to provide seeds for our seed collection. There have been 2 growing seasons, and we've grown marigolds, edamame beans, and sunflowers. And those seeds were saved and introduced into our collection for you to borrow. You could say this garden has more growing to do, And how, may you ask, this is done? It's done in a makeover sort of way. So for this makeover, we are deeply grateful to the Bolton and District Horticultural Society for their monetary donation in 2019. And they gave us some money to purchase raised garden beds, including the soil and the planting supplies. Now, unfortunately, this year, COVID is upon us, and we had to put that garden on hold, but our hopes are to have the garden ready for spring 2021. And if you're interested, more details about the seed collection can be found on our Callan Public Library website. We've answered so many questions. It's wonderful that you all took an interest and put them in the chat box. Thank you so much. I would like to remind you that there is that very brief survey, 30 to 40 seconds. Please click on the link in the chat box to complete the survey. And on behalf of Callan Public Library, I'd like to thank Stephanie again. And please keep your eye on our adult virtual program page for a recording of tonight's presentation, and feel free to share it. And thank you very much for joining us.